Hey Henry, we got a quick announcement. Hey everyone, we got a quick announcement here.
All right, y'all, listen up.
Yes, here we go. Okay, go ahead. Welcome, youth group. Yes.
Hello, I'm Blake Brown.
I'm Nicholas.
And so this year for the choir trip, we are going to Memphis. And so we have the annual spaghetti luncheon fundraiser, which helps provide about 30% of the trip's cost. And so really helps to keep the cost down for everyone's family and to help not spend as much money from the church's budget. This trip is really, it's just a very important thing.
Yes, it is.
But this trip is really important to us because we get to see a lot of new things, and especially with the service aspect of it, where, for example, last year we served at the Eugene mission, and the help we gave just with our manpower was, they said, like, the work we did was about 2 months worth of work in one day. And so
That's Eugene, Oregon?
Yeah, last year. And so it's just really amazing that we can help out that much in just the span of a few hours. And so we're just here to ask for your involvement and support. And so you can help in one or two ways, one of which is just come to the lunch, and when you eat, just donate however much it would take to take your family out to lunch that day. And then also think of what you may be able to donate to the lunch for the silent auction. And some popular items are tickets to anything like sporting events or concerts, vacation homes and trips, gift cards to restaurants, spas, or online gift cards to Amazon, very popular, and professional services. And so we have contribution forms for you. If you'd like to donate anything, and so I'd just like to thank you so much for your support. Yes?
When is the date of the silent auction?
March 3rd.
Okay, thank you.
And same for the dinner? Same for the spaghetti, March 3rd?
That's the,
March 3rd.
It's all the same,
That's
all
the same.
one big event. March 3rd, 11 to 1:30 on March 3rd. So it actually starts when the 11 o'clock service starts, so, and then goes through to 1:30. And that's usually the sanctuary, sometimes you can smell the garlic. Right?
Yes, sir.
So you guys have, okay.
Yeah,
How many?
left some over there on the table over there.
Okay, I was gonna say, yeah, probably just leave them there, maybe leave some here for when people walk out. Well, then, Nicholas, did you have anything, or was this?
I think Blake's got it.
Blake got it, okay. All right, well, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's one thing I had checked off to announce that I don't have to announce. So 1 month from today is the spaghetti luncheon, but today is the Super Bowl of Caring, which also starts at 11 o'clock. So we actually might have be able to smell some of that during the 11 o'clock service as well. That's in support of the Phil Strickland World Hunger Offering. So please plan to come. There is no charge for the food. However, just like with the spaghetti auction, it's asked or requested that you donate whatever amount you might have spent going to a nice lunch with your family at the church. And what else was I going to talk about?
New classes start Wednesday.
New classes on the parables start Wednesday nights.
And geography.
Geography, which one is that? Holy Geography class. Holy Land Geography class.
The interns are doing geography, and Mark and George are doing parables.
I'm sorry?
The interns are doing geography, Mark and George are doing parables.
Doing
I
parables.
think there's a third class too, but I don't know what it is.
Okay. So we still got stuff going on Wednesday nights, but new class schedules. Oh, I thought that this was interesting. Perkins, the Perkins School of Theology is holding a seminar, lecture series at the end of March. There's pamphlets on it right here for anyone who's wanting to delve deeper into certain theological issues. That's March 28th through March 30th. There'll be a series of public lectures. Minds on Fire, Hearts Aflame. So if you want more information about that, there's some brochures up here at the front. We only have a few, so I won't pass that around. Does anybody else have announcements that I may have overlooked?
Henry, we have two guests today with us.
We do, yes.
Faye Larson's mom is
Faye's
here.
mom. Welcome, Faye's mom.
Yep. And Rachel Lane is back with us as well. So
Hello, I don't think we, okay. Nice to meet you. Welcome, Rachel.
Yenny?
And Vicki, I've seen on Facebook that you're back.
Yes, I was back last week, so it's
Welcome
nice to be back.
Welcome back. Good to
You guys
have
are
you.
really special because you took good care of me, so thank you.
I had to wear a walking boot too when I broke my leg.
I've got 2 weeks and 5 days.
But it was counting.
Nobody's counting, yeah. So, it's dry.
Well, all right, so we've got Chad Mustain today, talking about the Good Shepherd, passages from both John and Matthew. Chad's a lot of times down in the perennial class, which is where I've been sneaking off to some. They're doing a pretty good study on the Gospels. Not that we don't do a good study on the Gospels too, but I'm kind of curious to see how they approach it. So if you see me sneaking out the door, I'm not going far away. But anyway, we're glad to have Chad today. We'll pass around the prayer request book, and I can do that at the end as...
and we didn't get a birthday thing. Does anybody have a birthday this last
Oh,
week?
did I miss that?
No, we don't. We didn't get one. So did anybody have a birthday this last week?
We don't have a any stickers.
Oh, I got stickers. I got stickers.
Oh, we got them, okay.
Nope, guess not.
Yeah.
Oh, Bert, you did? Okay. All right.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Bert.
There you go. Wear it proudly.
Well, all right. Chad, good to have you back. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. All right, good. Well, it's good to be with you all again. So today, our topic is Jesus as Good Shepherd, which is fascinating because really only one of our texts actually uses the phrase Good Shepherd. And so they seemingly are two texts that don't really fit all that well together. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But why don't we just orient ourselves to our text and read through them. So we're in Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 to 34. So we'll read that together, and then we'll jump right over into John and read that. So if one person wants to read 20 through 34, that's fine. If you want to break it up, I don't really have a preference.
Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Declare that these two sons of mine will sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in the kingdom." But Jesus answered, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left, this is not mine to grant, for it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard it, they were angry with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. It will not be so among you, but whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. There were 2 blind men sitting by the roadside. When they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, "Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David." The crowd sternly ordered them to be quiet, but they shouted even more loudly, "Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David." Jesus stood still and called them, saying, "What do you want me to do for you?" They said to him, "Lord, let our eyes be opened." Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes. Immediately they regained their sight and followed him.
we'll jump over to John, chapter 10. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 21. So if one person wants to read the whole thing or break it up, that's totally fine as well.
Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them in also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. Again the Jews were divided because of these words. Many of them were saying, he has a demon and is out of his mind. Why listen to him? Others were saying, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?
Thank you. Let's pause, go to God in prayer. Our good and our gracious God, our good and loving shepherd, God, we give you thanks for another day. God, recognizing the hardship, the pain, the struggle, the hunger, the insecurity that is all around us in our city, in our state, and in our world. And so, God, we look to you, God, grateful that you came to us as Jesus, who gave us this picture of a good and faithful shepherd. And so, God, may we learn from the example of Jesus today. God, may we seek ways that we can live out the example that Christ gave to us. So God, be in the midst of our conversation, in the midst of our thinking. God, may we be listening for your divine whispers this morning. We make this prayer in Jesus' name, our good shepherd. Amen. All right, so as we begin, I'm curious what stands out to you from two very different texts and very different stories that are joined together with this idea of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So as we were reading, was there anything that kind of jumped out or a question that arose for you as you were listening? I've got a lot of stuff I can tackle, but I want to see what is curious to you. What stood out to you may not have necessarily stood out to me or be the direction I might take things. So what are the things? Yes?
I think it's really cool to know that he is intimate. I mean, it's just one more verse that says, you know, he is intimate. He knows our voice.
Yes.
And you know his voice.
Yeah.
And it's so personal. You know, there are a lot of voices, but he knows my voice, and he knows your voice.
That's really comforting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Did anyone grow up around sheep? Just out of curiosity, anybody grow up on a farm or whatever sheep, or spend any time around sheep? You have? Yeah. Okay. Not to like out you in any way, but anything you could share out of that experience that might tie in with this text or give us more clarity into the role of a shepherd or sheep? Or...
We only had one at a time.
Okay.
But, you know, they didn't do a lot. They weren't very smart. I don't know, it's been a long time.
Yeah. And when you say you only had one at a time, why did you only have one at a time?
It was at my brother's ag project.
Okay.
We had like cows, we had lots of cows, but not, we only had like one sheep at a time. And so he would care for it for a period.
Okay.
And show it and then.
Eat it.
Oh. Yeah.
Well, you've heard of the herd mentality,
Mm-hmm.
where they all go like this. That's the sheep.
Yeah. So context matters, right, when we think of the idea of a shepherd and a sheep. One of the primary commentaries I consulted was William Barclay, who was in England. And the British have a very different understanding and practice of shepherding and purpose for the sheep than the context of this passage, which would have been the Middle East and Palestine. Any guesses on what differences might be, perhaps?
Well, I'm guessing in England they use the sheep for their wool. So
It's actually the other way around.
really?
Yes.
Huh.
That, yeah, lamb was a much more common thing eaten than, and in early Palestine, it was more
It was more for
for
the
the,
wool.
yeah, because you were
Yeah.
looking for an ongoing sustaining business
Right.
versus a shorter thing. Yeah, other things that might be different if you're just using your imagination, trying to think of.
Well, Chad, I'm not tracking with you on the England thing, but just sheep in general. I mean, if you see them out, they are filthy animals. I mean, they are dirty. They're not, they're not this white little thing you see in pictures of
Right.
Bible stories,
Yeah.
with Jesus and this white perfect sheep. Well, that's not real life.
Yeah.
But and they are just, they seem to be pretty dumb. I mean, they'll just wander off and.
Well, they all went off that cliff that time. Jesus sent those devils into them.
Well, that was the
Yeah.
pigs. That was pigs. That's what pigs.
Big
It
sheep.
took a wrong turn.
We can tell you didn't grow up on a farm.
We don't have to look very hard to see
Neither
who
did
did.
I.
We had an interesting, say what you said,
I asked, do they use border collies in the Middle East?
no, which is one of the key differences. So the role of the shepherd was very different. This idea of like border collies and dogs helping, that's more of the image of the shepherd and sheep herding that we get from England, right? And so the shepherd was much more hands-off. It was kind of like, entrusting the dogs to do the work, where in Palestine, in the context of this text, it was much more intimate, which is this whole image of the sheep knowing the voice of the shepherd. So the sheep literally know the voice of their literal shepherd, Jack or whoever it was, and then that's what Jesus is drawing on, and you all as the flock, the people, right, knowing my voice, Jesus, in that. So very different roles as well. William Barclay talked about how shepherds in this time, it was a sense of calling. This was their livelihood, where in the context of like England and later on, it's more just like a job to make ends meet, right? It wasn't like this thing that you were necessarily born into, and there was this deep like pride and aspiration to have this magnificent herd that you knew intimately. With the sheep knowing my voice, he talked about how in that time they would often literally name and knew each one of their sheep, and that's part of how, where we get this like, that Jesus would leave the 99 to find the one. That's drawing on this idea of shepherds. They know exactly how many sheep they have, and they know when, blah, blah, black sheep or whatever is missing, and then they're going out to find, the lost one. So Jesus draws on that in his teachings a lot, and this image of the shepherd is probably one of the most popular images for how we understand Jesus. There's tons of Old Testament passages that draw on it. If we had time, it would be fun to go through all the different Old Testament passages that draw on this idea of shepherd. A lot of the prophets draw on it. Anyone know the tie-in perhaps between, this is like bonus extra credit here, with Moses, and Moses being like kind of the first good shepherd? Anyone have an idea why that might be?
We carried a shepherd's staff.
Okay,
you know,
good.
And his father-in-law was a head sheep, I think, you know.
Yes.
So, what was his name?
Jethro.
Jethro, yeah, good.
Midian, yeah, so.
Yeah, so it's kind of an old tale that part of why Moses was held in such high esteem and was part of why God called Moses. Again, this is more so drawing on the Jewish tradition. We wouldn't necessarily find it directly coming from our Christian scriptures, but it's from the rabbis and such talking about Moses, being, working for his father-in-law Jethro as a shepherd, and that Moses had a sheep that got lost. He knew, right, when one of his sheep was missing, so he went out and found it, and has this whole dialogue with the sheep of, why did you run off? And the sheep says, well, it's because, I was looking for food, and I'm so exhausted because I didn't find any that now I can't come back. And I remember this distinctly from my own childhood, and like old, like felt board Sunday school lessons. I don't know if anyone else does, but the image of a shepherd with the sheep up on its shoulders, carrying it back. Well, that's actually inspired by Moses and the old Jewish kind of tale of Moses going out to find the lost sheep. The sheep was so exhausted it couldn't walk back on its own. So Moses not wanting to ever lose one of his sheep, because in those times as well, if you lost one of your sheep, you had to give an account for it, which is why it talks about laying down your life, that like a shepherd, based on their honor and their love, like if a lion got one of their sheep, they would actually go after the lion and attempt to just bring back like the leg of the sheep or the ear or something to say, I didn't just lose this sheep, like a lion attacked it and here's part of the sheep, so that, because that was their livelihood, if they lose one, right, their career's done in a sense. So they would literally lay down their life, even if it meant dying themselves, in defense of one of these things that we're kind of saying is one of these, like, not intelligent, dumb animals, right? That's the level of depth and love and responsibility that the shepherd had for the sheep, right? So Moses is this significant early figure that we get this idea of leaving the sheep to find the one. And then Jesus draws on this, right? And we have this in teachings later of Jesus leaving the 99, right, to find the one lost sheep. And so you can see the significance of the connection between Moses and the importance that Moses has played in our faith, drawing that to Jesus and the importance of Jesus as the idea of the Good Shepherd. So that's just like bonus material that you would not have just found in a first reading of the text that I found really fascinating. So what else stood out for you all? Any interesting details, questions that come out? Look at verse 20 of Matthew 20 quickly. I'm curious if this caught anyone's eye, or can someone read 20 verse 20?
Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked a favor of him. Good.
All right, now this is bonus material again. Let's jump over to Mark chapter 10. And if someone would read 10 verse 35 and watch for a key difference. It's the same account.
James and John, sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.
What's the key difference?
No mother.
Yeah.
Right. So who does the asking in one and who does the asking in the other?
The mother in Matthew and the guys themselves in Mark.
Yeah. So in Perennial, we're going through a study of the Gospels, and we're using, there's ancient artwork attached to each depiction of the Gospel. So Mark is a lion, Matthew is a human, Luke is an ox, and John is an eagle. And so we're going through book by book using the art and oral oral tradition and how that's kind of fed in. But this was the text that we studied last week that I actually taught on in perennial. And so we had some really rich and interesting discussion over this difference. Any thoughts why there would be a difference? Does it matter that there's a difference? And if it does, why, or if not?
Yes, and Mark, they're bold enough to ask for themselves.
Yeah, great thought.
I think it's kind of, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it's kind of really bold. I mean, who would go to your teacher, or whatever they're calling him at this time, well, they call him teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that to anybody. I want you to do what I ask you to do.
Yeah.
You know, that's really bold.
Okay. So if we compare that then to Matthew, where the mother asks, what do we think about that then?
So what, was Matthew written for a Jewish audience?
So Matthew was written primarily for a Jewish audience. Mark was written first.
So is, I don't know if this is culturally the same, but isn't, I feel like I've heard stories of mothers of Jewish boys kind of being advocates for them. I don't know, would that be consistent with that culture at that time? I don't
Could
know.
be,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, so that's certain, we explored that in perennial some last week as well. Yeah.
So it's not totally stereotypical.
So that's a very valid and good wondering. So one of the tensions, right, is that the Gospels were written at different times to different audiences and had different agendas, if you will, in their writing. And so that's why details are changed, which can be a bit disheartening to some. Yeah, what do you mean details are changed, you know? Like for me, it doesn't rock my faith to say, did James and John ask or did their mother ask? I think there's a deeper lesson in it, but for some that would say, no, everything's got to line up, and when details change, we have to find a way to be able to explain that, you know, so it can create different problems, right? But some of it has to do with the audience that they're speaking to, or the time in which they're writing. So Mark was written first, and there's actually a source called the Q source, or the Q Gospel, that we don't have record of, but that was out there. That's where a lot of these teachings and stuff of Jesus come, right? And so there was probably Mark and Q, and then Matthew and Luke came later, and they're drawing really heavily on Mark. Like 80% of what's in their Gospels comes from Mark, you know? And so when there's details that are different or things are switched, you have to wonder. And so we spent a lot of time last week on this, you know, wondering is why that is. Part of the theory that's out there is that Matthew, coming about 25 years later, writing, the kind of mystique and the legend of the disciples, if you will, their reputation, had kind of been building, right? And so Mark, having this really bold thing, could actually paint them in a bit of a bad light, saying like, who are these guys? Like they're around Jesus and they don't get it, and they're asking these really bold questions that seem really selfish and self-centered, but that's not what they're supposed to be, because they're supposed to be following in the way of Jesus and putting others first and not being concerned with merit. And so to soften the blow a little, if you will, they have the mother ask, so it looks like the mother is the one pursuing aspirations for their children.
Petitioning for their
Yes, for their success. So in a culture where women were not held in high esteem, were often viewed as property, they only kind of had one purpose of childbearing, you know, all of those things, it's a bit of a, I think, a punch in the gut towards women. I don't like that view, but that could be part of, again, when we talk about what were the agendas and what was going on at the time of the text, that could be one of those things going on as well. And so I find that a little bit like unsettling, especially like, you know, being married to a minister, serves on staff here, right? You know, I want Heather to be held in high esteem, and you know, so I don't like Matthew's jab at women.
But mothers still do that. When our daughter was at Hillcrest, the AP classes, and the mothers, if the grades weren't quite good enough or something, there were certain mothers from North Dallas that would show up and agitate that their son, particularly daughter, needed to be in that class, even if they didn't have quite the grades. And they were very aggressive, and you know, it was good for the sons, I mean, and the daughters, they were pushed to achieve, but it wasn't, it was kind of, other people took offense at it.
Yeah,
So I admire them for doing it,
yeah.
but it was also had a double edge there.
So were James and John the ones that Jesus called from the boats, like they were fishing with his father and he called them and they up and left?
Mhm.
Is that,
Yeah, so.
is that the group? So like, that they, like basically Jesus took away their family business, right? And so I could see how she's a little, because in that day, if I'm not mistaken, the kids take care of the parents. So then if they took away the family business, there wouldn't be really any means of livelihood for her. Like, she's looking out for herself too, because
Yeah, perhaps.
she want to make sure somebody was around to take care of her, or that.
Yeah, so there's a number of Marys that occur throughout Scripture, and it gets a little foggy sometimes on which Mary is which, and how does that apply, and if it's this Mary, what does that mean? And so part of the theory that is out there, and that I think there's a large consensus on, is that James and John here are most likely full cousins of Jesus, and so they maybe got this bit of a family in as well, and so maybe that's why they felt particularly emboldened as well, saying, like, we're your cousins, come on, Jesus, you know, like, give us a little something extra. That could be as well. I like to think, though, because while this does seem a bit of a jab at women, if we're looking at it in the context of this good shepherd who is loving and kind and looks out for all the sheep, right? And Matthew intentionally writes women in to the genealogy of Jesus, right? Where they're given some place of prominence. And so I find a bit of hope that in a culture that says women don't really have a place and they don't have a place at the table, so to speak, that for whatever reason, the mother's hanging out amongst the disciples. This is like the inner group, right? And what their purpose was, there's a lot of discussion around, but coming from a place like Wilshire, who believes in the full empowerment of women and the role that they can play in all levels of leadership within the church, you know, when we view a lot of these scriptures talking about women, we see them as leaders in these early developments of faith community and leadership, you know, especially in a lot of Paul's letters, that they were the ones probably actually sponsoring the ministry and the church and the things that were going on. So it could be looked at as a bit of a jab at women, but if you look at it in this broader context of this good shepherd, I think it's adding value and worth and a place at the table in a context where women didn't have much of that going on. Yeah?
I think she was shepherding her sons.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to say that being a mother, I would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at Mary and Martha, the sisters, you know, they had different roles, you know. So I think we all have different gifts, and even probably back then they had, some were good cooks and some were caregivers to the sick, and so everybody had their specialty, I guess, you know, and in the neighborhood, you know, and so in that community, but they did all hang out with Jesus and the disciples, you know, there was a group of women, so.
Yeah.
And you've got to have food. I'm so conscious of that when I read scripture and I think about how, I mean, some parts of it, how did they get food? I mean, somebody's got to cook, you know, and I always think about that. How did they get food? And of course, sometimes Jesus broke the bread and all that, but everybody had their own jobs to do, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Very well could be. Playing on this image of food for a moment, I played some music yesterday at a funeral up in Norman, Oklahoma. My dad used to serve as a pastor in Norman, and I was on staff at the church as the associate worship pastor, and I wasn't good friends with him, but he's younger than me. He was 32 and died tragically in a car accident, and I served on staff with his mom at the church, and really difficult funeral to be a part of for a lot of different reasons. But one of the beautiful things in the midst of that was the role that each person played. They're part of a real small church community, only about 50 people. They had probably at least 150 people that showed up into an auditorium space, not too much bigger than this room. So I mean, we were like cramming people in, right, to be present, to bear witness to this life of David that was cut too short. But afterwards, and so one of the tensions was the family dynamics, because some people were people of faith, some weren't. So they had a funeral service, and then they were just calling it the gathering, was what the second part, and that was kind of like for all the people that really weren't down with the whole God church side. Then there was this gathering, and the food spread at this thing was unbelievable. And so I asked, I said, this isn't just like cheap food, this is like good food. Like someone brought in a ton of barbecue and donated, and and so someone said it's the Mothers of Generations. The church is called Generations Church. They said they put out the phone call to the Mothers of Generations. And this family doesn't even go to Generations Church anymore, but just at the time, that's where they were, And it was this beautiful picture of everyone kind of knowing their role and their place in the midst of a horrible tragedy, right? And it was men and women that did the cooking, which was awesome. All the barbecue was donated by a guy that used to attend church with them, So we were all together in a period of time from like 2000 to 2006 or 7 or so. And so some of these people I hadn't seen since I graduated college, left being on staff at the church. So I haven't been there in just like 13 years roughly, And so I'm seeing people, some for the first time in like 13 years, and it was like a day hadn't gone by. And, but it was, again, this beautiful picture of what it meant to be a shepherd, and everyone had their role, and one of the sheep got lost, and unfortunately one of the sheep passed away in a tragic car accident. But to see how everyone came together, and I would say it was because we knew the voice of God, right? And that's like a key aspect of our text, is knowing the voice of God. And then some people had kind of strayed, but I trust that in the midst of that hardship, the voice of God was present. Through the songs that I sang, through the message that my dad brought. Batman was a theme of never been part of a funeral service where Batman was a key theme. We talked about God sending out the bat signal in the sky. It was like, it's resonated with some of the crowd, right? But trusting that even an odd thing that may not make a whole lot of sense to us, particularly maybe in a context of culture, that God's voice, if God called then, God continues to call now. And the United Church of Christ, one of their key phrases is that God is still speaking. We tend to think that God spoke, and now it's our job to discern, right? But if God is this good shepherd, the shepherd continually calls, right? And the sheep sometimes have to hear the voice anew, right? And God keeps calling and goes out to find the lost sheep, right? And so that God is still speaking even today. And I resonate with that. And I love that phrase that comes from our brothers and sisters in the United Church of Christ. God is still speaking.
Even if he has to reference Batman.
Yes, even through Batman, God is speaking. I would say that. Yeah.
That's why everything's holy in Batman.
Yeah. So there's, as you can tell, there's a lot of richness when we talk about the shepherd image then, and this idea of what does it mean to shepherd today in our own congregations, that it's not, especially in our Baptist tradition, right? It's not just George or Heather, they might be lead shepherds, if you will, but each one of us has a role, right? That we're a congregation, a body of committees and the committees on committees, and, but everybody's got a spot, right? And each one of us has to help be in tune with the voice of the Good Shepherd, so that when it's our turn to lead and to speak, that we're hopefully in tune with the Spirit of God, right? To help lead and to know our spot. Good. I want to jump down to verse 28 of Matthew, chapter 20. Someone wouldn't mind reading that short verse as well.
Just as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many.
So this is a hugely controversial passage. caused all kinds of problems in early church councils and the early church fathers and mothers. This is bonus point material. Again, anyone have any idea why this short little verse, and particularly the word ransom, might cause some issues?
Did they think of it as money?
Yeah,
Is that the deal? You ready?
part of it, yeah. Good, roll with that. So, a ransom, right? We typically hear, a
So,
kidnapping.
so who is it given to? I mean, yes.
Yes. So, in the context of this, any guesses when we're talking about ransom? Who's paying and who's receiving the ransom, perhaps?
It's like good is paying ransom to evil to overcome that, so.
Yes. So, so there's this whole thing, right, called theories of atonement. I'm sure you've heard this, like this is the basic idea is why did Jesus have to die on the cross for the forgiveness of sins? And so different significant figures throughout time have latched on to certain verses and ideas and to say, oh, well, it's this theory of atonement. And so this particular verse has spawned a whole view of atonement called ransom theory based on one verse. And it's problematic for many because the idea is that God is paying a ransom to the devil to free humanity, if you will. And so it creates a lot of issues, but this was a really, really popular theory, particularly in the Middle Ages, all based on one verse, which is why context and looking at the broader perspective of a particular chapter or a whole book or the overarching kind of arc of Scripture is so important because we can do all kinds of damage and harm and difficulty when we focus too much on zooming in on a particular verse. And so others would say, if we zoom out a bit, that this idea is that it's out of the love of God and the love of this Good Shepherd to say that there's nothing I won't do. There's no price I wouldn't pay, no act I wouldn't go through, right? If you think of the shepherd or even a parent, to say there isn't hardly anything I wouldn't do for my child, right? And that's this image that we have of God and of Jesus, that Jesus was literally willing to offer his life as the sacrifice, as the ransom, as fill in the blank, to say, this is how much I love my sheep, this is how much I love creation, that I would even go as far that love might even bring about the ultimate risk and loss to give one's self for another. And so that would be my brief reinterpretation of that text. If you want to do more reading, it's fascinating. It's called ransom theory. If you just Google like atonement theories, you'll learn far more than you probably wanted to know and have more questions for teachers next week. So you can just direct them.
Could it have been that the word ransom was the wrong word?
Could have been.
I mean, Jesus came, according to Jewish law, sacrifice had to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And he made that sacrifice for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he didn't pay a ransom to the devil. Maybe he made this ultimate sacrifice according to Jewish law.
Yeah.
So the rest of us would not have to make that sacrifice.
Yeah, that's certainly one, right? We believe Matthew was most likely possibly a tax collector, right? So he might have had money in mind, and so ransom might have been what made sense to him in his interpretation. Yeah, there's a lot of wondering. I think only Matthew and Mark are the ones that use this actual word ransom, and then the other Gospels don't actually have that exact phrasing in theirs. Good. Other thoughts? I want to jump over to John a little bit as well. We're hitting some things broadly.
Why did we include the two blind men story with the first section?
Yeah.
It's like two completely different things.
I had that same wondering.
Okay. Well, let's just skip right over to John then.
Yeah, we can, right? I mean, we can unpack it a little bit if we want, but.
Well, the John passage follows some discussion of Jesus healing the blind and the Pharisees investigated that healing. So, and they do reference at the very end of that passage in John.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, you have to read, okay.
So it ties in most likely in the context of, especially in John, Jesus, one of the themes in John and in Mark is that Jesus is oftentimes in conflict with religious leadership of the day. And a lot of his conflict came around his healings based on like who he was healing or when he was healing or what he was doing. You know, is this person a sorcerer? Is he like in tune with the demons? And, you know, then that's why the question, can demons cast out demons, you know, comes up. And so it's, yeah, you're right. It's in that context.
Well, the Jewish hierarchy was just looking to pick a fight.
Right.
I mean, that's just the way it was. He was stealing their thunder, and they didn't care for that.
Right. Which is part of, in John 10, when it's talking about like the thief and the bandits and stuff, you can go very literal in that thinking if you're sticking with the idea of sheep and someone trying to steal your sheep for their own profit, you know. But then also, it's most likely referencing false prophets and other teachers of the day, right? Because that's, again, one of the things that's going on is, you know, the Jewish people are looking for the Messiah, right? They're looking for the next great leader, most likely a political and military leader, right? That's going to lead them to victory, so to speak. And so when John is writing, he's writing even later, so there's been more development and more false teachers and people saying, no, I'm really the Messiah. That's where we get like the zealots and stuff that are referenced in the text. And so that's most likely what John has a bit in mind, as well as these other teachers that are trying to steal from the flocks of others, or say, no, I'm the one whose voice you need to listen to. Follow me because I'm the latest kind of iteration of the Savior, the person
False
that's
prophet.
Exactly. And so John is saying, no, let's remember whose voice we're listening for or to, and it's not a lot of these false prophets, false teachers that's going on. Good. Anything else that comes out?
One of the things that I noticed was John 10, verse 16. I have never really noticed that I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice, so there will be one flock, one shepherd. And I don't think I had ever noticed that before.
Yeah, good. So you didn't notice it, but does it cause discomfort? Does it just cause question? What does it do?
It causes questions, like
Okay.
what is the meaning of that? I don't feel discomfort by it, but I guess I want to know more about that.
He's kind of alluding to his sphere of influence.
Okay, say more.
Being broader than what you might think. In other words, it's not restricted to one little area, so to speak, or one people bunch.
Right.
It goes a lot further.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we're really able to comprehend just how far that goes.
Yeah, that's it. That would be a great direction that's probably kind of headed or going on, is that right? So one of the tensions in the ministry of Jesus is it seems, when we look at it, it tends to look a bit exclusive, that it's only for this, and it, you know, there's these passages of don't tell anyone yet, don't go, I'm just here for kind of the Jews, and so it can seem a little bit like, so if Jesus came to save the whole world, why is he just focused so much on one small region and one small group of people? Is it only for them, or is it for a larger context? And so many would say that, I don't like using military and like war imagery, but it's a common thing, right? Sometimes you can't go after the whole thing, you have to go after specific battles and strategic kind of events, so to speak, to say this has got to be the focus. We've got to do this to then open up the possibility of a broader, you know, battle and victory and all that. And so many commentators would say that's probably what is going on, and that's a bit of what John is then alluding to say it did start with this small group of people. God has a tendency of doing that, you know, highlighting Moses and Abraham and saying, you know, I'm calling you specifically, but through your family, there's going to be, more people than the stars that you can count that will be included in the family of God, right? So it's starting small and growing big. It starts in this very small region, and then it goes global, it goes universal, if you will. Luke's gospel focuses much more on the broader influence and going to the Gentiles, especially when we get into Acts and the letters of Paul. We see the growing sphere and influence. So yeah, so there's that. An interesting thing, again, this is bonus material, is that this particular passage, I'm just going to read this statement from William Barclay. He says this, and he's referencing verse 16 that you highlighted, Laura. He says, in the King James Version, there is a mistranslation. In the King James, it has, there shall be one fold and one shepherd. That mistranslation goes back to Jerome in the Vulgate, which is very early translations of Scripture. On that translation, the Roman Catholic Church has based the teaching that since there is only one fold, there can only be one church, the Roman Catholic Church, and that outside there is no salvation. But the real translation, beyond all possible doubt, as given in the Revised Standard Version, and then we're reading the New Revised Standard Version, so that's kind of considered to be the best translation now, is there shall be one flock, one shepherd, or even better, there shall become one flock, and there shall be one shepherd. The unity comes from the fact not only that the sheep are forced into one fold, but that they hear, answer, and obey one shepherd. It is not an ecclesiastical unity, it's a unity of loyalty to Jesus Christ. So it's not just the Roman Catholic Church, or not just the Baptist Church, but it's in all of these different folds. But the key thing is the loyalty to Jesus Christ, hearing the voice of Jesus.
Well, the key for me is it's not just the Jews, so we have a chance.
Right, exactly, because we're kind of out of luck if it's just the Jews.
Right.
We are definitely the outsider, although we tend to be focused on ourselves. In reality, yes, we are the Gentiles, the outsiders.
Chad, that last 60 years, our church, Welfare Baptist Church, have two shepherds only. One, Bruce McKeever, some of you know him, and I know him. And some of us came to the church when George Mason take it over. And we are blessed beyond measure for those years. And this church in this area. And by now, all of us become somewhat if not a good shepherd, we should be a shepherd, you know what I mean? To help, to take care of the flock of this church. God has been blessed our church really beyond any. And it was years ago, and somebody asked me, says, are you going to leave the church? I said, no. I said, they had to kick me out of the church. And that's how this God have to bless all of us through the ministry of Bruce McKeever and George Mason. Yes, they are different kind of person. Yes, we love them and we learn a lot of things over last that many years. I first came to this church in 1968, joined the church, and grew up in, my family was grew up in the church. And it has been a blessing far more than I ever expected.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, when we think about the exclusion or inclusion in the context of this passage, but also tying it into today. That in Baptist circles, I grew up hardcore Southern Baptist, Jerry Falwell Southern Baptist. Jerry Falwell did my dedication. So that's how Southern Baptist I was, and I'm sure he rolls in his grave. He knows the views that I hold now. But in the Baptist tradition, it started really tight and small. And there are some churches, of which Wilshire, I'm grateful, is one, that continues to hear this voice of God, where we would say that God is still speaking. He's speaking on behalf of Wilshire right now. And we continue to listen, whether that's on issues and questions of divorce, or who can serve as a deacon, or who to call as a pastor, and how long should we continue to call them as a pastor, which is the blessing of pastors serving for 30-plus years. That's unheard of today. And as Wilshire's continued to follow the calling to affirm baptisms and other Christian traditions and not requiring rebaptism like Baptists would often do. These have been sources of contention, right? And then with our most recent progression, and including all and not having 2 classes of membership. And I would say I find great hope in that we are a congregation that continues to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd, that we believe that God is still speaking today. And it takes, to have the same leaders for a long period of time, but to continue to hear the speaking voice of God. That takes a congregation, right? It was a congregational process, and all of those matters. And there was some disagreement, right? But I think that's the beauty as God continues to call. I want to point out one final thing, and then I'll give it to you, Eunice. So the word good here is fascinating. There's 2 different words for good used in Greek. It says, he says this, now we know 2 further points with this passage. Jesus describes himself as a good shepherd. Now in Greek there are 2 words for good. There is agathos, which simply describes the moral quality of something, and then there is kalos, which means that in goodness there is quality of winsomeness, which makes it lovely. He says when Jesus is described as the Good Shepherd, the word kalos is used. In him there is more than efficiency and more than fidelity or quality, there is loveliness. He says sometimes in a village or a town, people speak about the good doctor. They are not thinking only of the doctor's efficiency and skill as a physician. They are thinking of the sympathy and the kindness and the graciousness which he brought with him and which made him a friend of all. In the picture of Jesus as the Good Shepherd, there is a loveliness as well as strength and power. And so I think that's a beautiful image to close on. It just wasn't that Jesus was this high-quality Good Shepherd that never lost the sheep, right? But there was this deep love and affection to know each sheep by name, to know their voice so that they would know his voice, because there was that interaction, right? God speaks to us so we can learn the voice of God. I think there's a lot of beauty in that as we talk about and think about this favorite image in Scripture, the Good Shepherd.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it very much. Okay, let's do prayer requests before we go to church or go downstairs. One, Kelly Backhouse' father, you pronounce his name? DeVallis Cox. Okay, fell yesterday. Oh, and it seems to be okay. So where are you, Kelly? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, weird. My mother called me this morning in between early service and coming here. Fell, wasn't in the tub, tripped and fell into the tub and hit his head on the faucet. And that was yesterday, and she couldn't get him up. She had to call the fire department. They came, and of course they got him up, and she said he seems fine today, walking around, eating, but it really scared her. And he's fallen before, so I don't know what to make of it, but
Okay.
I thought
We're praying for him. And Deborah, how's your hand doing? You had hand surgery this week.
Yeah, it's better, still in a lot of pain from different kind of movements, but it's coming along. I had a huge cyst down in my joint.
The picture you sent, it looked like your hand was 3 times its size.
Yes, it was horrible. It began to go down on Tuesday of this week. It dramatically went down, but